Chapter 3. The Face of the Abbot. If Madame Sara had one prerogative more than another, it was that of taking people unawares. When least expected, she would spring a mine at your feet, engulf you in the most horrible danger, stab you in the dark, or injure you through your best friend. In short, this dangerous woman was likely to become the terror of London if steps were not soon taken to place her in such confinement that her genius could no longer assert itself. Months after my last adventure, once again my fears slumbered. Madame Sara's was not the first name that I thought of when I woke in the morning, nor the last to visit my dreams at night. Absorbed in my own profession, I had little time to waste on her. After all, I had made up my mind she might have left London. She might have carried her machinations, her cruelties, and her genius elsewhere. That such was not the case, as the story quickly shows. The matter which brought Madame Sara once again to the fore began in the following way. On the 17th of July, 19,000, I received a letter, and it ran as follows. 27 West Terrace, Chilton Road, Putney. Dear Mr. Druce, I am in considerable difficulty and am writing to beg for your advice. My father died a fortnight ago in his castle in Portugal, leaving me as his heiress. His brother-in-law, who lived there with him, arrived in London yesterday and came to see me, bringing me full details of my father's death. These are the last degree mysterious and terrifying. There are also a lot of business affairs to arrange. I know little about business and should greatly value your advice on the whole situation. Can you come here to see me tomorrow at 3 o'clock? Signor de Castro, my uncle, my mother's brother, will be here, and I should like you to meet him. If you can come, I shall be very grateful. Yours sincerely, Helen Sherwood. I replied to this letter by telegram. We'll be with you there at 3 tomorrow. Helen Sherwood was an old friend of mine. That is, I had known her since she was a child. She was now about 23 years of age and was engaged to a certain Godfrey Despard, one of the best fellows I had ever met. Despard was employed in a merchant's office in Shanghai, and the chance of immediate marriage was small. Nevertheless, the young people were determined to be true to each other and to wait to that turn in the tide which comes to most people who watch for it. Helen's life had been a sad one. Her mother, a Portuguese lady of good family, had died at her birth. Her father, Henry Sherwood, had gone to Lisbon in 1860 as one of the undersecretaries to the embassy, and never cared to return to England. After the death of his wife, he had lived as an eccentric recluse. When Helen was 3 years old, he had sent her home, and she had been brought up by a maiden aunt of her father's, who had never understood the impulsive, eager girl, and had treated her with a rare want of sympathy. This woman had died when her young charge was 16 years of age. She had left no money behind, and as her father declined to devote one penny to his daughter's maintenance, Helen had to face the world before her education was finished. But her character was full of spirit and determination. She stayed on at school as a pupil teacher, and afterwards supported herself by her entertainments. She was a good linguist, a clever musician, and had one of the most charming voices I have ever heard in an amateur. When this story opens, she was earning a comfortable independence, and was even saving a little money for that distant date when she would marry the man that she loved. Meanwhile, Sherwood's career was an extraordinary one. He had an extreme stroke of fortune in drawing the first prize of the Grand Christmas State Lottery in Lisbon, amounting to 150 million reis, representing in English money £30,000. With this sum, he bought an old castle in the Estrella Mountains, and, accompanied with his wife's brother, a certain Pietro de Castro, went there to live. He was hated by his fellow men, and, with the exception of de Castro, he had no friends. The old castle was said to be of extraordinary beauty. and was known as Castillo Mondego. It was situated some 20 miles beyond the old Portuguese town of Coimbra. The historical accounts of the place were full of interest, and its situation was marvelously romantic, being built on the heights above the Mondego River. The castle dated from the 12th century and had seen brave and violent deeds. It was supposed to be haunted by an old monk who was said to have been murdered there. But within living memory, no one had seen him. At least, so Helen had informed me. Punctually at 3 o'clock on the following day, I found myself at West Terrace, and was shown into my young friend's pretty little sitting room.
"How kind of you to come, Mr. Druce," she said. "May I introduce you to my uncle, Signor de Castro?"
The signor, a fine-looking man who spoke English remarkably well, bowed and gave a gracious smile, and immediately entered into conversation. His face had strong features, his beard was iron gray, and also were his hair and mustache. He was slightly bald about the temples. I imagined him to be a man of about 45 years of age.
"Now,"
said Helen, after we had talked to each other for a few minutes,
"perhaps Uncle Pedro will explain to Mr. Druce what has happened."
As she spoke, I noticed that her face was very pale and that her lips slightly trembled. "It is a painful story," said the Portuguese. "Most horrible and inexplicable." I prepared myself to listen, and he continued. "For the last few months, my dear friend has been troubled in his mind. The reason appeared to me extraordinary. I knew Sherwood was eccentric, but he was also very matter-of-fact, and I should have thought him the last man who would be likely to prey on nervous terrors. Nevertheless, such was the case. The old castle has a reputation of being haunted, and the apparition that is supposed to trouble Mondego is that of a ghastly white face that is now and then seen at night peering out through some of the windows or one of the embrasures of the battlements surrounding the castle. It is said to be the shade of an abbot who was foully murdered there by a Castilian nobleman who owned the castle 100 years ago. It was late in April of this year when my brother-in-law first declared that he saw the apparition. I shall never forget his terror. He came to me in my room, woke me, and pointed out to the embrasure where he had seen it. He described it as a black figure leaning out of a window, with appallingly horrible white face and wide-open eyes, apparently staring at nothing. I argued with him and tried to appeal to his common sense, and did everything in my power to bring him to reason, but without avail. The terror grew worse and worse. He could think and talk of nothing else, and to make matters worse, he collected all the old literature he could find bearing on the legend. This he would read and repeat the ghastly information to me at mealtimes. I began to fear his mind would become affected, and 3 weeks ago I had persuaded him to come away with me for a change to Lisbon. He agreed, but the very night before we were to leave, I was awakened in the small hours by hearing an awful cry, followed by another, and then the sound of my own name. I ran into the courtyard and looked up at the battlements. There I saw, to my horror, my brother-in-law rushing along the edge, screaming as though he is in extreme terror, and evidently imagining that he was pursued by something. The next moment he dashed headlong down 100 feet onto the flagstones by my side, dying instantaneously. And now comes the most horrible part. As I glanced up I saw, and I swear it with as much certainty as I am speaking to you now, a black figure leaning out over the battlement, exactly at the spot from which he had fallen. A figure with a ghastly white face which stared straight down at me. The moon was full, and it gave the face a clearness that was unmistakable. It was large, round, and smooth, white with a whiteness I had never seen on a human face, with eyes widely open. A fixed stare. The face was rigid and tense, the mouth shut and drawn in at the corners. Fleeting as the glance was, for it vanished almost the next moment, I shall never forget it. It is indelibly imprinted on my memory. You see, speaking. For my long and constant contact with men and their affairs, I drew at once that what De Castro had just said instantly raised the whole matter out of the commonplace. True or untrue, real or false, serious issues were at stake. Who else was in the castle that night? I asked. No one. And his instant reply, not even old Gonzales, our one manservant. He had gone to visit his people in the mountains about 10 miles off. We were absolutely alone. You know Mr. Sherwood's affairs pretty well, I went on. On the supposition of trickery, could there be any motive that you know of for anyone to play such a ghastly trick? Absolutely none. You never saw the apparition before this occasion? Never. And what were your next steps? There was nothing to do except to carry poor Sherwood indoors. He was buried on the following day. I made every effort to have a sympathetic inquiry set on the foot, but the castle is in such a remote spot and the authorities are slow to move. The Portuguese doctor gave his sanction to the burial after a formal inquiry. Deceased was testified as having committed suicide or temporarily insane, but to investigate the apparition was absolutely denied. And now, I said, will you tell me what you can with regard to the deposition of the property? The will is a very remarkable one, replied De Castro. Senor Sousa, my brother-in-law's lawyer, holds it. Sherwood died a much richer man than I had any idea. This was owing to some very successful speculations. The real and personal estate amounts to £70,000, but the terms of the will are eccentric. Henry Sherwood's passionate affection for the old castle was quite morbid, and the gist of the conditions of the will is this. Helen is to live on the property. And if she does, and as long as she does, she is to receive the full interest on £40,000, which is now invested in good English securities. Failing this condition, the property is to be sold, and the said £40,000 is to go to a Portuguese charity in Lisbon. I also have a personal interest in the will. This I knew from Sherwood himself. He told me that his firm intention was to retain the castle in the family for his daughter, and for her son if she married. He earnestly begged of me to promote his wishes in the event of his dying. I was not to leave a stone unturned to persuade Helen to live in the castle, and in order to ensure me carrying out his wishes, he bequeathed to me the sum of £10,000, provided Helen lives at Castelo Montego. If she does not, I lose the money. Hence, my presence here, and my own personal anxiety to clear up the mystery of my friend's death, and to see my niece installed as owner of the lovely and romantic property on the peninsula. It has, of course, been my duty to give a true account of the mystery surrounding my unhappy brother-in-law's death. I sincerely trust that a solution to the sterile mystery will be found, and that Ellen will enter into her beautiful possessions with all confidence. The terms of the will truly are eccentric, I said. Then turning to Helen, I added, surely you can have no fear of living at Castillo Mondego, when it would be the best means of bringing about the desire of your hearts. Does that mean you are engaged to be married, Ellen? Asked De Castro. It does, she replied. Then she turned to me. I am only human and a woman. I could not live at Castillo Mondego with this mystery unexplained, but I am willing to take every step, yes, every step, to find out the truth. Let me think over the case, I said after a pause. Perhaps I may be able to advise some plan of clearing up this unaccountable matter. There's no man in the whole of London better fitted to grapple with the mystery than I am, for it is, so to speak, my profession. You will please see me in your hearty collaboration, Mr. Druce, said Senora de Castro. When do you propose to return to Portugal? As soon as I possibly can. Where are you staying now? At the Cecil. He stood up as he spoke. I am sorry I have to run away, he said. I promised to meet a friend, a lady, in half an hour from now. She is a very busy woman. I must not keep her waiting. His words were commonplace enough, but I noticed a queer change in his face. His eyes grew full of eagerness, and yet, was it possible, a curious fear also seemed to fill them. He shook hands with Helen, bowed to me, and hurriedly left the room. I wonder whom he's going to meet, she said, glancing out the window and watching his figure as he walked down the street. He told me when he first came that he had an interview pending of a very important character. But there, I must not keep you, Mr. Druce. You are also a very busy man. Before you go, however, do tell me what you think of the whole thing. I certainly cannot live in a castle that ghastly face is unexplained, but at the same time I do not wish to give up the property. You shall live there, enjoy the property, and be happy, I answered. I will think over everything. I'm certain we shall see a way out of the mystery. I wrung her hand and hurried away. During the remainder of the evening, this extraordinary case occupied my thoughts to the exclusion of almost everything else. I made up my mind to take it up, to set every inquiry on foot, and, above all things, to ascertain if there was a physical reason for this apparition's appearance. In short, if Mr. Sherwood's awful death was for the benefit of any living person. But I must confess that, I think as I would, I could not see the slightest daylight until I remembered the curious expression on De Castro's face when he spoke of an appointment with a lady. The man had undoubtedly his weak point. He had his own private personal fear. What was its nature? I made a note of the circumstance and determined to speak to Vandeleur about it when I had a chance. The next morning, one of our directors of the agency called. He and I had a long talk over business matters, and when he was leaving, he asked me when I wished to take my holiday. If you would like to go away for a fortnight or 3 weeks, now is your time, was his final remark. I answered without a moment's hesitation that I should like to wish to go to Portugal, and would take advantage of the leave of absence which he now offered. Now, it had never occurred to me to think of visiting Portugal until that moment, but so strongly did the idea now take possession of me that when I went at once to Cecil and had an interview with De Castro, I told him that I could not fulfill my promise to Miss Sherwood without being on the spot, and I should therefore accompany him when he returns to Lisbon. His face expressed genuine delight, and before we parted, he arranged to meet at Charing Cross on the following morning. Then I hastened to Putney to inform Helen Sherwood of my intention. To my surprise, I saw her busily placing different articles of her wardrobe into a large trunk which occupied this place of honor in the center of her sitting room. "What are you doing?" I cried. She colored. "You must not scold me," she said. "There's only one thing to do, and I have made up my mind this morning to do it. The day after tomorrow I'm going to Lisbon. I mean to investigate that mystery for myself." "You are a good, brave girl," I cried. "But listen, Helen, it is not necessary." I then told her that I had unexpectedly obtained a few weeks' holiday, and that I intended to devote my time to her service. "Better and better," she cried. "I'll go with you. Nothing could be more planned and more advantageous for me." "What idea put it into your head?" I asked. "It isn't my own," she said. "I spent a dreadful night, and this morning, soon after 10 o'clock, I had an unexpected visitor. She is not a stranger to me, although I have never mentioned her name. She is known as Madame Sara, and she—" "My dear Helen," I cried, "don't you mean to tell me that you know that woman? She is one of the most unscrupulous in the whole of London. You must have nothing to do with her, nothing whatsoever." Helen opened her eyes to their widest extent. "You must judge, Madame Sara," she said.
I have known her for the last few years, and she has been a most kind friend to me. She's got me more than one good post as a teacher, and I've always felt a warm admiration for her. She is beyond doubt the most unselfish woman I ever met.
I shook my head.
You will not get me to alter my opinion of her, continued Helen. Think of her kindness in calling me to see me today. She drove here this morning just because she had happened to see my uncle Pietro de Castro yesterday. She has known him, too, for some time. They had a talk about me, and he told her about the strange will. She was immensely interested, and said that it was imperative for me to investigate the matter myself. She spoke in the most sensible way, and finally that she would not leave me until I had promised to go to Portugal, to visit the castle and in my own person to unearth the mystery. I promised her and felt that she was right, and I am keeping my word.
When Helen had done speaking, I remained silent. I could scarcely describe the strange sensation which visited me. Was it possible that the fear which I had seen so strongly depicted in De Castro's face was caused by Madame Sara? Was the mystery in the old Portuguese castle also connected with this terrible woman? If so, what dreadful revelations might not be before us? Helen was not the first innocent girl who believed in the madam, and was not the first whose life was threatened.
Why don't you speak, Mr. Druce? She asked me at last. What are you thinking of?
I would rather not say what I'm thinking, I answered, but I'm very glad of one thing, that it is I am going with you.
You're my kindest best friend, she said. And now we'll tell you one thing more. Madam said that the fact that you're being one of the party put all danger out of the case as far as I am concerned, for she knew that you were the cleverest man she has ever met.
I replied slowly. There is a cleverer man than I, and his name is Eric Vandeleur. Did she happen to speak of him?
No. Who is he? I've never heard of him.
I will tell you some day, I replied, but not now. I rose and bade her a hasty goodbye, and then went straight to Vandeleur's rooms. Whatever happened, I had made up my mind to consult him on the matter. He was out when I called, but I left a note, and he came round to my place in the course of the evening. In less than a quarter of an hour, I put him in possession of all the facts. He received my story in silence. "Well," I cried at last, "what do you think?" "There is but one conclusion, Druce," was his reply. "There is a motive in this mystery, method in this madness. Madame is mixed up in it. That being the case, anything supernatural is out of the question. I am sorry Miss Sherwood is going to Lisbon, but the fact that you are going too may be her protection. Beyond doubt, her life is in danger. You must do your best, and forewarned is forearmed. I should like to go with you, but I cannot. Perhaps I may do more good here watching the arch-fiend who is pulling the strings." De Castro took the information quietly that his niece was about to accompany us. "Women are strange creatures," he said. "Who would suppose that a delicate girl would subject herself to the nervous terror she must undergo in the castle? Well, let her come. It may be best. And my friend, the lady whom I spoke to you about, she recommended it." "You mean Madame Sara?" I said. "Yes," he replied with a start. "Do you know her?" "Slightly," I replied, in a guarded tone. Then I turned the conversation. Our journey took place without adventure, and when we got to Lisbon, we put up in the Durance Hotel. On the afternoon of the same day, we were out to interview Manuel Sousa, the lawyer who had charge of Mr. Sherwood's affairs. His office was in the Rue do Rio Janeiro. He was a short, bright-eyed little man, having every appearance of honesty and ability. He received us affably and looked with much interest at Helen Sherwood, whose calm, brave face and her English appearance impressed him favorably. "So you have come all this way, Signora," he said, "to investigate the mystery of your poor father's death?" Be assured I will do everything in my power to help you, and now you would all like to see the documents and papers. Here they are at your service. He opened a tin box and lifted out a pile of papers. Helen went up to the pile and looked at the windows.
I don't understand Portuguese, she said. You will examine them for me, won't you, Uncle Petro, and also you, Mr. Druce?
I had sufficient knowledge of Portuguese to be able to read the will, and I quickly discovered that De Castro's account of it was quite correct.
Is it your intention to go to Castillo Mondego? Asked the lawyer when our interview was coming to an end.
I can answer for myself that I intend to go, I replied. It would give me great pleasure to take Mr. Druce to that romantic spot, said De Castro.
And I go with you, cried Helen.
Dear, dear young ladies, said the lawyer, a flicker of concern crossing his bright eyes.
Is that necessary? You will find the castle very lonely and not prepared for the reception of a lady. Even so, I have come a long way to visit it, replied Helen. I go with my friend Mr. Druce and with my uncle, and so far as I am concerned, the sooner we get there, the better.
The lawyer held up his hands.
I wouldn't sleep in that place, he exclaimed, for 20 contos of Greece.
Then you really believe in the apparition, I said. You think it is supernatural? He involuntarily crossed himself.
The tale is an old one, he said. I have been known for hundreds of years that the castle is haunted by a monk who was treacherously murdered there. That is the reason, Miss Sherwood, why your father got it so cheap. Supernatural or not, I must get to the bottom of the thing, she said in a low voice.
De Castro jumped in, an impatient expression crossing his face. If you don't want me for the present, Druce, he said, I have some business of my own I wish to attend to. He left the office, and Helen and I were about to follow him when Senor Sosa suddenly addressed me.
By the way, Mr. Druce, I am given to understand that you are of the Solvency Inquiry Agency of London. I know that business very well. I presume, therefore, that matters of such interest depend upon this inquiry?
Oh, the interests are great, I replied, but they are in no way connected with my business. My motive in coming here is due to my friendship. This young lady is engaged to be married to a special friend of mine, and I have known her personally from her childhood. If we can clear up the present mystery, Helen Sherwood's marriage can take place at once. If, on the other hand, the terror which hangs over Castillo Mondego is so overpowering that Miss Sherwood cannot make up her mind to live there, the long separation awaits the little pair. I've answered your question, Senor Sousa. Will you, in your part, answer mine?
Certainly,
he replied. His face looked keenly interested, and from time to time he glanced from Helen to me. Are you aware of the existence of any motive which would induce someone to impersonate the apparition and so bring about Mr. Sherwood's death?
I know no such motive, my dear Senor. Senor de Castro will come into £10,000 provided, and only provided, Miss Sherwood takes possession of the property. He is the one and only person who benefits under the will, except Miss Sherwood herself.
We must, of course, exclude Senor de Castro, I answered. His conduct has been most honorable in the matter throughout. He might have been tempted to suppress the story of the ghost, which would have been his obvious advantage. Is there no one else who you can possibly suspect?
No one. Absolutely no one.
Very well, my course is clear. I've come here to get an explanation of a mystery. When is it explained, Miss Sherwood will take possession of the castle.
And should you fail, sir, ghosts have a way of suppressing themselves when most earnest desired to put in an appearance.
I don't anticipate failure, Senor Sosa, and I mean to go to the castle immediately.
We are a superstitious race, he replied, and I would not go there for any money you'd like to offer me.
I am an Englishman, and this lady is English on her father's side. We do not easily abandon a problem when we set to work to solve it.
What do you think of it all? Asked Helen of me when we found ourselves soon afterwards in the quaint old-world streets.
Think, I answered. Of course, it's clear. We have got to discover the motive. There must be a motive. There was someone who had a grudge against the old man and wished to terrify him out of the world, and to believing that the apparition is supernatural, I decline to even allow myself to consider it.
Heaven grant that you may be right, she answered, but I must say a strange and most unaccountable terror oppresses me whenever I conjure up that ghastly face.
And yet you have the courage to go to the castle.
It is a case of duty, not courage, Mr. Druce.
For the rest of the day, I thought over the whole problem, looking at it from every point of view, trying to gaze at it with fresh eyes, endeavoring to discover the undiscoverable. The motive. There must be a motive. We should find at the castle. We must go there to the castle on the morrow, but no, and due to haste was unnecessary. It might be well for me, helped as I should be by my own agency, which a branch of it was found in Lisbon, to discover amongst the late Mr. Sherwood's acquaintances, friends, or relatives the motive that I wanted. My agents set to work for me, but though they did their utmost, no discovery of the least value was found. At the end of the week, I told De Castro and Helen that I was ready to start. We will go early tomorrow morning, I said. You must make your preparations, Helen. It will take us a day to reach Castelo Mondego. I hope that our work may be completed there, and that we may be back again in Lisbon within the week. Helen's face lit up with a smile of genuine delight.
The inaction of the last week has been terribly terrifying, she said, but now that we are really going to get near the thing, I feel quite cheerful.
Your courage fills me with admiration, could not help saying, and I went out to make certain purchases. Amongst these were 3 revolvers, one for Helen, one for De Castro, and one for myself. Afterwards, I had an interview with Sousa and took him as far as I could into my confidence. The danger of the supernatural is not worth considering, I said. The danger of treachery, of unknown motives, is considerable. I do not deny the fact for a moment. In case you get no tidings from us, come yourself or send someone to the castle within a week.
This letter came to you by the last post,
said Sousa, and handed me one from Vandeleur. I opened it, and it read as follows. I met Madame Sara a week ago at the house of a friend. I spoke to her about Castelo Mondego. She admitted that she had interest in it, but she knew Miss Sherwood, and hoped that she had taken possession to visit her in a romantic spot. I inquired further if she was aware of the contents of the strange will. She said she had heard of it. Her manner was perfectly frank, but I saw that she was uneasy. She took the first opportunity of leaving that house, and on making inquiries I hear that she left London by the first train this morning, en route to the continent. These facts may mean a great deal, and I should advise you to be more than ever on your guard. I put the letter in my pocket. Got Sousa to promise all that was necessary, and went away. At an early hour the following morning, we left Rossio Station to Coimbra, and it was nearly 7 in the evening when we finally came to the end of our railway journey and entered a light wagonette drawn by 2 powerful bay stallions for a 20-mile drive to the castle. The scenery as we approached the spurs of the Estrella were magnificent beyond description, and I gazed up at the great peaks, now bathed in the purples and golds of the sunset. The magic and mystery of our strange mission became tenfold intensified. Presently, the steep ascent began along a winding road between high walls that shut out our view, and by the time we reached the castle, it was too dark to form any idea of its special features. De Castro had already sent word of our probable arrival, and when we rang the bell at the old castle, a phlegmatic-looking man opened the door for us. "Ah, Gonzales," said De Castro, "we are here. I trust you have provided comfortable beds and a good meal, for we are all hungry as hawks." The old man shrugged his shoulders, raised his beetle brows a trifle, and fixed his eyes on Helen with some astonishment. He muttered in a Portuguese dialect, which I did not know in the least to comprehend, something to De Castro, who professed himself satisfied. Then he said something further, and I noticed the face of my Portuguese friend turn pale. "Gonzales saw the spectre 3 nights ago," he remarked, turning to me. "It was leaning as usual out of one of the windows of the northwest turret. But come, we must not terrify ourselves the moment we enter our future home, Miss Helen. You are doubtlessly hungry. Shall we go to the banqueting hall?" The supper prepared for us was not appetizing, consisting of some miserable goat chops, and in the great hall, dimly lighted by a few candles and silver sconces, we could scarcely see each other's faces. As supper was coming to an end, I made a suggestion. "We have come here," I said, "on a serious matter. We propose to start an investigation of a very grave character. It is well known the ghosts prefer to reveal themselves to one man or woman alone, and not to a company. I propose, therefore, that we should occupy 3 different rooms as far as possible from the other in the castle, and that the windows of our 3 rooms should command the center square." De Castro shrugged his shoulders, and a look of dismay spread for a moment over his face. But Helen fixed her great eyes on mine. Her lips moved slightly as though she would speak, then she pulled herself together. "You are right, Mr. Druce," she said. "Having come on this inquiry, we must fear nothing." "Well, come at once, and we will choose our bedrooms. You as ladies shall have first choice." De Castro called Gonzales, who appeared holding a lantern in his hand. A few words were said to the man in his own dialect, and he led the way, going up many stone stairs, down many others, and at last we flung open a huge oak door, and we found ourselves in a vast chamber with 5 windows, all mullioned and sunk in deep recesses. On the floor was a heavy carpet. A 4-post bed with silver hangings was in a recess. The rest of the furniture was antique and massive, nearly black with age, but relieved with brass mountings, which, strange to say, were bright as though they had recently been rubbed. "This was poor Sherwood's own bedroom," said De Castro. "Do you mind sleeping here?" He turned to Helen. "No, I should like it," she replied emphatically. "I'm glad this is your choice," he said, "for I don't believe, although I am a man and you are a woman, that I could myself enjoy this room. It was here I watched his dead body. Ah, poor fellow, I loved him well." "We won't talk about memories tonight," said Helen. "I am very tired, and I believe I shall sleep. Strange as it may sound, I am not afraid. Mr. Druce, will you locate yourself? I should like at least to know what room you will be in." I smiled at her. Her bravery astonished me. I selected a room at right angles to Helen's. Standing in one of her windows, she could easily, if necessary, get a glimpse of me if I were to stand in one of mine. De Castro chose a room equally far away from Helen's on the other side. Then we both bade the girl good night. "I hate to leave her so far from help," I said, glancing at De Castro. "Nothing will happen," he replied. "I can guarantee that. I am dead tired. The moment I lay my head on my pillow, ghost or no ghost, I shall sleep till morning." He hurried off to his own room. The chamber that I had selected was vast and lofty, and might have accompanied 20 people. I must have been more tired than I knew, for I fell asleep as soon as my head touched the pillow. When I woke, it was dawn, and eager to see my surroundings by the light of day, I sprang up, dressed, and went down to the courtyard. 3 sides of the court were formed by the castle buildings, but along the 4th ran a low balustrade of stone. I sauntered towards it. I shall never forget the loveliness of that scene that met my eyes. I stood upon what was practically a terrace, a mere shelf with a scraping rock on the side of a dizzy cliff that went down below, a near 2,000 feet. The Mondego River ran with a swift rushing noise at the foot of the gorge, although at the height of which I stood, it looked more like a thread of silver than anything else. Towering straight ahead of me, solemnly up into the heavens, stood the great peak of the Serra de Estrella, from which the rosy sunrise and the morning clouds were rolling into gigantic white wreaths. Behind me was the great, irregular pile of the castle, with its battlements, turrets, and cupolas, hoar and gray with the weight of centuries, and now transfigured and bathed in golden light. I had just turned to glance at them when I saw De Castro approaching me. "Surely," I said, "there's never been such a beautiful place in the world before. Can we never let it out of the family? Helen shall live here." De Castro came close to me. He took my arm and pointed to a spot on the stone flags. "On this very spot our father fell from the battlement above," he said slowly. I shuddered, and all the pleasant thoughts were instantly dispelled by the memory of that hideous tragedy and the work we had still to do. It seemed impossible that in this radiant living sunlight to realize the horror that the wall was contained, and might still contain. At some of these very windows, a ghastly face had appeared. Helen, De Castro, and I spent the whole day exploring the castle. We went from dungeons to turrets and made elaborate plans for alternate nightly vigils. One of the first things that I insisted on was that Gonzales was not to sleep in the castle at night. This was easily arranged, as the old man having friends in the neighboring village. Thus, the only people in the castle after nightfall would be De Castro, Helen, and myself. After we had locked old Gonzales out, and we had raised the portcullis, we again began the complete round of the entire place, thus ensured that no one else could be hiding in the precincts. Finally, we placed across each entrance thin silken threads which would be broken if anyone attempted to pass them. Helen was extremely anxious that we should not be divided into 3 portions, and that she should share the vigils, but this De Castro and I both prohibited. "At least for tonight," I said. "Sleep soundly. Trust the matter to us. Believe me, this is for the best. All arrangements are made. Your uncle will patrol until 1 o'clock in the morning, and then I will go on duty." This plan was evidently most repugnant to her, and when De Castro left the room, she came to me and began to plead. "I have a strange and overpowering sensation of terror," she said. "Fight as I will, I cannot get rid of it. I would much rather be up than in the terrible room. I slept last night because I was too weary to do anything else, but I am wakeful tonight. I shall not close my eyes. Let me share your watch at least. Let us pace the courtyard side by side." "No," I answered. "That would not do. If 2 of us together, the ghost, or whatever human being poses as a ghost, will not dare to put in an appearance. We must abide by our terrible mission, Helen. We must each watch alone. You will go to bed now, like a good girl, and tomorrow night, if we have not discovered anything, you will be allowed to take your share of the night watch." "Very well," she answered. She sighed impatiently, and after a moment she said, "I have a premonition that something will happen tonight. As a rule, my premonitions come right." I made no answer, but I could not help giving her a startled glance. It is one thing to be devoid of ghostly terrors when living in practical London, surrounded by the world and the ways of men, but it is another thing to be proof against strange terror which visits all human beings more or less when they are alone, when it is night, and when the heart beats low. Then we are apt to have distorted visions. Our mental equilibrium is upset, and we fear we do not know what. Helen and I knew that there was something to fear, and as our eyes met, we dared not speak of what the utmost in our thoughts. I could not find De Castro, and presumed that he had taken up his watch without further ado. I therefore retired to my own room and prepared to sleep. But the wakefulness which had seized Helen was also mine, for when the Portuguese entered my bedroom at 1 o'clock, I was still wide awake. "You have seen nothing?" I said to him. "Nothing," he said cheerfully. "The moon is bright, the night is glorious. It is my opinion the apparition will not appear." "I will take the precaution to put this in my pocket," I said, and I took up my revolver, which was loaded. As I stepped into the courtyard, I found the most brilliant moonlight had lit up the northwest wall and the turrets, but the sharp black shadow of the south wall lay diagonally across the yard. Absolute stillness reigned, broken only by the croaking of thousands of frogs in the valley below. I sat down on a stone bench by the balustrade and tried to analyze my feelings. For a time, the cheerfulness which I had seen so marked in De Castro's face seemed to have communicated itself to me. My late fears vanished, and I was not even nervous. I found it difficult to concentrate on things of the object which had brought me so far from London. My mind wandered back to London and to my work there, but by degrees, as the night chill stole over me, and the stillness of the night began to embrace me, I found myself glancing ever and again at those countless windows and deep embrasures, while a queer, overpowering tension began to be felt, and against my own will, a terror, strange and humiliating, overpowered me. I knew that I was stronger than I, and fight against it as I would, I could not overcome it. The instinctive dread of the unknown that is the bottom of the bravest man's courage was over me. Each moment it increased. I felt that if the hideous face which would appear at one of the windows, I would not be answerable for my self-control. Suddenly I sat motionless, my eyes riveted on the windows of the old castle. I felt, or fancied I felt, that I was not alone. It seemed to me that a shadow moved down the courtyard, and close to me. I looked again, and it was coming towards me. It was with difficulty that I could suppress a scream which almost rose to my lips. The next instant I was glad I had not lost my self-control, when the slim, cold hand of Helen Sherwood touched mine. "Come," she said softly. She took my hand, and without a word, she led me across the courtyard. "Look up." I did look up, and then my heart seemed to stop, and every muscle in my body grew rigid as though from extreme cold. At one of the first-floor windows in the northwest tower, there in the moonlight leaned the apparition itself. A black, solemn figure with arms crossed on the sill, a large round face with waxy whiteness, features immobile and fixed in a hideous, unwinking stare right across the courtyard. My heart gave a stab of terror, and I remained absolutely rigid. I forgot the girl by my side and the wild beating of my pulse. It seemed to me that it must beat itself to death. "Call my uncle," replied Helen. And when I heard her voice, I knew that the girl was more self-possessed than I was. "Call him," she said again, "loudly, at once." I shouted his name. "De Castro! De Castro! It is here!" The figure vanished at my voice. "Go," said Helen. "Go, I will wait for you here. Forward at once." I rushed up the stairs towards the room where De Castro slept. I burst open his door. The room was empty. The next instant I heard his voice. I am here, he said. "Come at once, quick." In a moment I was by his side. "This is the very room where it stood," I said. I ran to the window and looked down. De Castro followed me. Helen had not moved. She was still gazing up. The moonlight fell full on her white face. "You saw it too," gasped De Castro. Yes, I said, and so did Helen. It stood by this window. I was awake, he said, and heard your shout. I rushed to my window and saw the spectre distinctly, and followed it to this room. You swear you saw it. It was the face of the abbot. My brain was working quickly, and my courage was returning. The unfathomable terror that night's scene was leaving me. I took the caster suddenly by both his arms and turned him around so that the moonlight should fall upon him. You and I are alone in the tower. Helen Sherwood is in the courtyard. There is not another living being in the whole castle. Now listen. There are only two possible explanations of what has just occurred. Either you are the spectre, or it is supernatural. Ah, he cried. Are you mad? I might well be, I answered bitterly. But of this I am certain. You must prove to me whether you're the apparition or not. I make the suggestion now in order to clear you from all possible blame. And make it that we may have absolute evidence that could not be upset because of the terrible tribunal. Will you now strip before me? Yes, before you leave the room, to prove to me that you have no mask hidden anywhere on you. If you do, I shall be satisfied. Pardon my insistence, but in a case like the present, there must be no loophole. Of course, I understand you, he said. I will remove my clothes. In 5 minutes, he had undressed and dressed again. There was no treachery on his part. There was no mask nor any possible means of his simulating the face of his person. There is no suspicion about you, I said, almost with bitterness. By heavens, I wish there were. The awfulness of this thing is driving me mad. Look at the girl standing by herself in the courtyard. I must return to her. Think of the courage of a woman who would stand there alone. He made no answer. I saw that he was shivering. Why do you tremble? I asked suddenly. Because of the nameless fear, he replied. Remember that I saw her father. I saw him with the terror on him. He ran along the battlements. He threw himself over. He died. He was dashed to pieces on the very spot where she is standing. Get her to come in, Druce. I will go and speak to her, I said. I went back to the courtyard and rejoined Helen, and in a few words told her what had occurred. You must come with me now, I said. You will catch your death of cold standing here. She smiled, a slow, enigmatic sort of smile. I have not given up the solution yet, she said, nor do I mean to. As she spoke, she took her revolver from her belt, and I saw that she was strangely excited. Her manner showed intense excitement, but no fear. I suspect foul play, she said. As I stood here and watched you and Uncle Petro talking to each other by that window, I felt convinced. I am now more than ever convinced. She broke off suddenly. Look, oh heaven, look, what is that? She had scarcely uttered the words before the same face appeared in another window to the right. Helen gave a sharp cry, and the next instant she covered the awful face with a revolver and fired. A shrill scream rang out in the night. It is human after all, said Helen. I thought it was. Come. She rushed up the winding stairs, and I followed. The door of the room where we had seen the spectre was open. We both dashed in. Beneath the window lay a dark, huddled heap, and the moonlight shining on it. And staring up with the same wide-open eyes was the face of the abbot. Just for a moment, neither Helen nor I dared to approach it, but after a time we cautiously drew near the dark mass. The figure never moved. I ran forward and stretched out my hand. Closer and closer I bent until my hand touched the face. It was human flesh, and it was still warm. Helen, I said, turning to the girl, go at once and find your uncle. But I had scarcely uttered the words before Helen burst into a low, choking laugh. The most fearful laugh I'd ever heard. Look, Look, she said. Before our eyes, the face tilted, foreshortened, then vanished. We were both gazing into the countenance of the man whom we knew as Pedro del Castro. His face was bathed in blood and convulsed with pain. I lit a lantern, and once more I approached, lying on the ground by his side, something hairy, which for an instant I did not recognize. Then the next moment I saw what it was, and it explained everything. It was a wig. I bent nearer still, and the whole horrible description became as plain as daylight. For painted on the back of the man's perfectly bald head, giving the startling illusion of depth and relief, and all the hideous expression that had terrified one man at least out of the world, was the face of the abbot. The wig had completely covered it, and so skillfully was it made that the keenest observer would have never suspected it was one, itself being slightly bald in order to add to the deception. There, in that dim, bare room, in broken sentences and the voice that failed as his life passed, de Castro faltered out the story of his sin. "Yes," he said, "I have tried to deceive you, and Gonzalez aided me. I was mad to risk one more appearance. Bend nearer, both of you. I am dying. Listen. Upon this estate, not a league across the valley, I found 6 months ago alluvial gold in great quantities at the bed of the gully. In the Biblioteca Publica in Lisbon, I had years before got accounts of mines worked by the Phoenicians, and was firmly persuaded that some of the gold still remained. I found it, and to get the full benefit of it, I devised the ghastly scheme which you have just discovered. I knew that the castle was supposed to be haunted by the face of an old monk. Sherwood, with all his peculiarities, was superstitious. Very gradually I worked upon his fears, and then, when I thought the time was ripe for my experiment, personated the apparition. It was I who flung him from the battlements with my own hand. I knew that the terms of the will would divert all suspicion from me, and had not your shot, Helen, been so true, you would never have come to live here. Well, you have avenged your father and saved yourself at the same time. You will find in the safe in the corner of the banqueting hall plans and maps of the exact spot where the gold is to be found. I could have worked there for years unsuspected. But it is true that I should have lost 10,000 pounds, but I should have gained 5 times the amount. Between 4 and 5 months ago, I went to see a special friend of mine in London. She is a woman who stands alone as one of the greatest criminal minds of her day. She promised at once to aid me, and she suggested, devised, and executed the whole scheme. She made the wig herself, with its strangely bold appearance so deceptive to the ordinary eye, and she painted the awful face on my bald skull. When you searched me just now, you suspected a mask, but I was safe from your detection. To remove and to replace the wig was the work of an instant. The woman who had done all this was to share my spoils." "Her name!" I cried. "Sara, the great, the invincible," he murmured. As he spoke the words, he died.